Hello everyone, welcome back to another video with Case Solutions. In this video, we'll be finding the greatest common factor of the numbers 42, 126, and 210. To find the greatest common factor means to find the largest number that can be divided evenly into all three numbers. One tip before we get started is we know that the greatest common factor of all three numbers cannot be bigger than our smallest number. So what I mean by that is, to find the greatest common factor of 42, 126, and 210, I know for all of them to have the same greatest common factor, the greatest common factor for 42 cannot be bigger than 42. So I don't need to look at 50, 60, or whatever, because that number cannot be divided evenly into 42. So your greatest common factor of your three sets of numbers, or however many numbers you have, is never bigger than the smallest number that you have. So 42, we know, is the max of our greatest common factor for these three sets of numbers. So in order for us to find our greatest common factor, what I like to do is I write out the first number. I'm going to change the colors, change it to a blue. So for 42. And then what I do is I say, what's 1 divided by 42? So 1 and 42 give me even numbers. 1 can be divided evenly into 42 because it gives me 42 back. So I put 1 and 42. And that's always the case. 1 divided by any number is going to give you that same number back. So that's going to be your largest factor of that number, that same number. Then I say, okay, what's 2 divided by 42? And 2 can divide evenly into 42 to give me 21. So I'm going to write 2 there, and then I write 21 on this end. And as you can see on our right-hand side where we have the 21 and the 42, that means any number between 21 and 42 does not divide evenly into that number. And you can test that out. So you can test out maybe 30, 36, 40. It does not divide evenly into the number. And so that's the reason why I do it in this order. So we can see the number line almost of the numbers that divide evenly into our number. Okay. So then I go to my next number. I did 1, I've done 2. So now I say, what is 42 divided by 3? That gives me a even number, not an even number, but a whole number. So 42 divided by 3 gives me 14. And I do the same thing. Well, what's 42 divided by 4? 42 divided by 4 does not give me a whole number. It's actually 10.5. So I don't write that number down because that means that 4 does not divide evenly into 42. Because if it divided evenly, it would give me a whole number. In this case, it gives me a decimal, and so I won't write that down. So we'll go to our next number, 42 divided by 5. Again, that does not give you a whole number. It gives you a decimal, so we don't write that number down. We want the numbers that divide evenly into it. So we go to our next number, 42 divided by 6. So 42 divided by 6 is actually 7. So we're going to go 6, and we're going to write 7 right behind it. And you keep going. So 42 divided by 8 does not give us a whole number. 42 divided by 9 doesn't give us a whole number. And you keep going. And you keep going until you get to your smallest number on your right-hand side. And my smallest number so far is 14. And so if you keep going, you'll notice that any number between 7 and 14 is going to give you a decimal. So in this case, these are all the numbers that divide evenly into 42. So these are the factors of 42. Now we're going to do the same thing for 126. But before we start, the greatest common factor of 42, as you can see, is 42. But now let's do the same thing for the next number, which is 126. And let's switch up the colors. So we're going to go 126. And again, we know we can write 1, and we know we can write 126 way over here. But again, like I mentioned in our notes earlier, we know that 126 is not a factor of 42. And no factor over the number 42 will not be the answer for this problem because our greatest common factor cannot be bigger than our smallest number, and that's 42. So in this case, I don't even need to write it, but just to go through the steps. Okay, so now we go to our next number. We say, what is 2 divided by 126? And that's going to give us 63. So we know again that that's not going to be our greatest common factor for the 3 sets, but we'll write it out. Then we say, what is 3 divided by 126? That's going to give us 42. So look at that. 42 shows up again. So we have 42 as a factor here in our first number 42. We have 42 as a factor here in 126. Now we could keep going and do the same process we did in number 1 where we kept going for now what's 4 divided by 126. But because that greatest number has shown up, you could stop right there. But we don't know if 42 is going to be a greatest common factor of 210. So we have to keep going. So now we say, what's 126 divided by 4? That does not give us a whole number. It actually gives us a decimal, so it does not divide evenly. So we're going to skip that number. 126 divided by 5, we know will not give us a whole number. So now we go to 6. 126 divided by 6 gives us a whole number. 6 and 21. So 126 divided by 6 gives us 21. Then we say 7. 126 divided by 7 gives us a whole number, 7 and 18. And as you can see, I write my smallest number to the left-hand side and the bigger number to the right-hand side to complete that number line. So we're getting pretty close of almost completing this factor here. So we've done 7. Let's try out 8. 126 divided by 8 doesn't work. Okay. 126 divided by 9. Oh, that works. 9 and 14. Okay. And then you keep going. So if you keep going on this route, you'll find out that any number between 9 and 14 will not work. They will not give you whole numbers. They're going to give you decimals. So for this example, we can stop right there. So we can see some common factors just looking at these first 2 numbers, 42, 21, 14, 7, 6, 3, 2, 1. And so far, the greatest common factor is 42. But let's see if 42 goes into 210 as well. So we're going to do the same step. Let's just switch up our colors. We're going to do the same step now for finding the factors of 210. So we know the 1 and 210. Then we say, okay, what's 210 divided by 2? It's going to give us 105. Okay. 210 divided by 3 gives us 70. So we can write that down, 3 and 70. 210 divided by 4 does not work. It gives us a decimal, so we do not write 4 down. So we skip to our next number, 210 divided by 5. And that works. That gives us 42. So I'm going to write down 5 and 42 here. And look at that, 42 came up again. So we can keep going and find the rest of the factors because there are more in between 5 and 42. You're going to find 6, 7, 10, 14, 15, 21, 30, 35. But in this case, we know that the greatest common factor is the largest of the 2 numbers. And the largest number that we could have is 42. And so because 42 showed up, we can stop right there. So if you're doing a time-sensitive test and you just needed to get the greatest common factor, this is the easiest way to find your answer. And once you get it, you don't need to keep going. You can stop right there. So we found 42 here, we found it here, and we've also found it here. So that means the greatest common factor of 42, 126, and 210 is 42 because it divides evenly into all 3 numbers, and it's the largest number that divides evenly into those numbers. So we couldn't say 63 or 126 because they don't divide evenly into 42. And we couldn't say 70 or 105 or 210 because they don't divide evenly into 126 or 42. So the largest one, again, is the smallest of your numbers. It can never be bigger than your smallest number. So we knew right there once we found 42 that we could stop. But again, if you had to answer out the full equation, say for instance, your teacher or the question is asking for all the factors, then you would keep going here to write out the rest of those factors for 210. But in this case, to answer the problem, once we found 42, we knew we were done. So I hope that helps.